Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Roberts. Welcome to the May 21st edition of Effective, Efficient, Affordable, and above all, accountable to you. I am joined again this evening by John Gauger. John, welcome.
Thank you, James.
Our mission this evening is to do a very simple, plain program. There will be no new information on this evening's show. We are simply going to wrap up what we have been telling you over the last 6 or 7 weeks. With respect to the budget process, we are going to tell you what we think about the proposed budget, which you will have the opportunity to accept or reject on Saturday, June the 1st at the Pearson School. If you cannot attend in person, either vote absentee or go down to Town Hall and cast your ballot ahead of time. Let there be no lack of clarity, ladies and gentlemen. We are voting no. And our job this evening is to explain to you why we are voting no, and to allow you to reach your own conclusions. We are not, we're not like those people who tell you what you should vote. We will, however, tell you how we see the facts, how we see this budget playing out in the myriad of problems that Winsted faces. We will explore whether it solves or takes any steps to resolve any of those problems. And we will leave you, we hope, with a very clear sense that you should not support this budget, that you should be pressing for an alternative that actually deals with Winsted's problems. Because as much as you're told there are no alternatives, that the only alternative is bankruptcy, we are telling you that if you vote for this budget, you are voting for bankruptcy. And you should instead be reaching for one of the many other alternatives, an alternative which avoids bankruptcy, which moves the town forward, which pays its bills, and solves the issues that we face.
Yes, and just a little clarity. If you are a property owner of $1,000 or more, that can be a house, that can be a car, that can be just about anything.
A boat.
A boat. And it's here in Winsted. You have the ability to go down and vote on the budget. You do not have to be on a registry list or a registered voter. It is 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturday, June 1st. If you can vote ahead of time, or if you're not going to be there that day and you will be here during the week preceding, you can go down to the town hall and vote right then and there. You can fill out the absentee ballot request form, present it right to the town clerk. They will give you a ballot. You can take it in the back room and vote, and then you have completed the process.
And we understand the frustrations are high at this point. So many of you believe that after probably 3 years of a totally dysfunctional government organization here in Winsted, why bother voting? We understand your frustrations, we share your frustrations, but we implore you not to voice your frustration by staying home, but rather to voice your frustration by going out and voting, by making it very, very clear where you stand. And if that means you support the budget, then fine. Do so in strength. But if you don't support the budget, let there be a very clear message delivered to the majority of the Board of Selectmen that you need change. You need change that actually resolves our problems, that actually acknowledges our problems. I guess the first question we have to ask ourselves is, does this pass the smell test? If we ignore the many details, does the big picture of this budget pass the smell test?
And the simple answer is no.
No, it does not. I mean, the three clear issues, for me at least, with respect to the smell test, is it's a giant tax increase. That increase comes alongside giant increases in your water and sewer taxes, and that there is no acknowledgement of the current deficit. There is no plan to deal with the current deficit. There is no plan to deal with the fact that the deficit will grow. For those three reasons, the smell test fails. Now, let's walk through each of those with some degree of specificity.
Let's start with revenues. On the revenue side, we've been to the town meeting. We've heard the town manager present his views on where the revenues fell short. His presentation focused pretty much almost exclusively on the difference between a 97% collection rate and 98% collection rate. And as we stated here previously, on a $20 million revenue, 1% equals $200,000. Last year alone, the deficit was $1.2 million. It's now, according to the presentation made at the town meeting, between $2.8 and $3.2 million. 1% didn't do it.
Yeah, clearly the tax assumptions, the tax collection assumptions are not the big driver of our problems, and clearly the major problem that we have to face before we face all other problems is the deficit. Our current deficit, as John has alluded to, is somewhere between $2.5 and $3.5 million. The official number as of last night was $2.5 million. But still, that ignores a lot of items that you and I would probably include in the deficit. All of the pension monies that disappeared somewhere between being sent to the pension fund and actually reaching the pension fund are not included in that number. All of the outside accounts who actually had cash in them as recently as Christmas of this year no longer have cash in them. Those numbers should be included in the deficit. But we're talking, our estimate all along has been $2.5 to $3.5 million, and I think that's probably still fair. Tax collection rates aren't the issue. The issue in the past on the revenue side has been a failure to raise revenues to pay for the bonds.
Well, it's revenues that are booked but are really bogus revenues.
Right.
I mean, you have three in this budget. You have $1 million coming from water and sewer. And I mean, the budget is what, $2.6 million. So the biggest component is stripping out of that and putting it in to support the town budget and to support the town manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The second component is $595,000 of monies from insurance companies. We'll wait till the auditors come back with their unqualified statement. But I would say that that's not going to hit either.
Right.
The third one is revenues from the state. I believe that it's booked at $300,000 more than what the state had offered, and the state is coming in $500,000 less. So you have an $800,000 swing.
Yeah, and the town manager acknowledged this last night. He actually acknowledged, particularly on the state revenue side, he said, listen, when we put the budget together, we didn't know what the numbers from Hartford were going to be. Well, we're not the only town that faces that problem. All 169 towns have that problem. And it seems to us that when you have no room for flexibility whatsoever, if you have no cash left in the kitty, if you have nothing in the fund balance, when it comes to sort of determining some of these soft and fuzzy issues, you have to err on the conservative side. You have to assume revenues are going to be low. You can't assume that Hartford is suddenly going to have a fit of the generosities and going to be tossing out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of additional revenues. They're not. Hartford is as broke as we are. They just happen to know it and acknowledge it and are trying in a sort of peculiarly ass-backwards Hartford way to fix it, whereas we are just pushing it under the rug and saying, problem, no problem. Our budget, the proposed budget, includes a raft of bogus revenues. It's that simple. Water and Sewer last night presented their current year numbers. We are currently, as of mid-May, in a deficit position in Water and Sewer. Asked whether they foresaw that being made up by the end of the year, they offered the only thing they can offer, which is, we hope so. We have no idea, in other words, but we hope so. But that doesn't bode well for a budget which relies on an extra $1 million being raised through gigantic rate increases on the water and sewer side to be funneled back into the town budget. We've been told that those increases were 20 and 35% respectively. Yesterday, we were told what the overall increase in water and sewer revenues was projected at for next year per this budget, and that's a 40% increase.
Right.
Now, individuals paying 25 and 35% more do not translate into a 40% increase in the whole. That math don't work.
Plus when you're turning off customers, so you're no longer leaning them. You're no longer collecting interest on whatever they didn't pay. You're physically turning them off, and you have no recourse to any revenue. Right.
I mean, quite simply, we're being lied to again. Either the increases were a lot more than 20 and 35%, or we don't have a hope in hell of getting a 40% increase in total revenue. It's got to be one of those two things, because we're not gaining customers. That much we know.
But when we went back and we looked at the previous years, excluding debt service, I think they were all fairly positive, with the exception of 1 year, but they were very close. To say that you are going to pull $1 million out of the water and sewer and it's going to be a viable entity, I mean, you're going to put it into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
You're stripping it of any cash flow. You're stripping it of anything that they could do to make capital improvements to the system, and they need them. I mean, they need dam work on all the dams.
They acknowledged last night that if they break a light bulb, they don't have the money to replace it. Much less a pipe, much less a sewer, much less a dam, much less a reservoir, much less anything else.
So if you want to keep this asset, if the town wants to keep this asset within the town, you can't do this.
No.
You can't do what you're doing, and you're going to have to bite the bullet. It's general obligation bonds. You're going to have the town assume it, and everybody's going to have to pay it. If you want to go forward and have a sewer department and a water company.
Right. So that's the revenue side. The budget, as have prior budgets, includes a whole series of unlikely or outright bogus revenues. The insurance proceeds, the water and sewer $1 million, and the expectation of funds from the state, which even the town manager has already acknowledged aren't going to happen. Last time round, it took him 6 weeks after we passed a budget for him to acknowledge that we weren't getting those state grants. This time he's saying it up front. But he's saying pass the budget anyway. I know it doesn't work. I know it doesn't have the revenues that we're actually going to get. I know all of those things. But I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. Just pass the damn thing. That's the approach that we're getting from our town manager. And that doesn't work for Winsted, or at least it shouldn't work for Winsted. So what about the expense side of things? Have we captured the right expenses?
And once again, the listings from the superintendent of schools listed a tremendous amount of outstanding bills, and he even threw in a list of encumbrances to the end of the year, totaling about $3.6 million.
Yeah, I mean, we've captured a lot of expenses, that much is clear. Some of them make sense, some of them don't. But we have missed the one set of expense that we absolutely know about and that we absolutely need to deal with. And that's all of the expenses associated with the deficit.
Yeah.
We have the bills. This is not money that we had planned to spend, but we haven't spent because somehow we're short. We've actually spent the money. We have the shoebox. It has bills inside. We provided you with services we instead you now have to pay. And we haven't included any of that in the budget. And that's just bogus.
There's no closure in this proposal that you will ever contain the expenses, number one, and number two, that you'll ever pay them down. I mean, an additional mill going to an undesignated fund balance, we saw where that one went the last 3 years.
Right.
I mean, it goes right out the window because there is no financial control over the system, whether it be on the education side, whether it be on the town side, of making people adhere to budgets.
And the inescapable conclusion of not including the deficit in the budget is one of two things are going to happen. Either we're going to do what the town manager and the majority of the Board of Selectmen have suggested, which is we're really not going to include it in the budget. We're just not going to pay them. We're going to take that shoebox and we're going to toss it in the Mad River. And we're going to tell every single person on that list of bills, whether it be CLMP or the health insurance people or the moms who are driving their kids to school, that whole list, we're telling you, good luck. We ain't paying you, ever. Come back in 8 years' time and we'll think about it, but we ain't paying you. You're not in the budget. Good luck. Get lost. That's one alternative.
Yeah.
It's not an acceptable alternative. You can't run a town on that basis. The other alternative is to say, we're going to take this budget and we're going to tear it up. We told you where we were going to spend the money. Well, actually, we're not planning on spending the money in any of those places. For starters, we're spending $3 or $4 million on this other crap, this shoebox over here that we told you didn't exist. That's where we're actually spending the money.
And that's what we're doing now.
Right. But we're only doing that for part of it. So, if we're going to have a budget, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to go through this exercise of actually approving as the legislative body in this town how much money is going to be raised and what it's going to be spent on, we have to expect the government to actually stick to the budget.
And they don't.
By not including the deficit, they are by definition not doing that. So where does that leave us? If we have a budget relying on revenues which we know are not going to happen, and we have a budget not recognizing expenses that we know are going to happen.
We don't have a budget.
We don't have a budget. It doesn't balance. The old teeter thing, it's supposed to balance, otherwise the kid falls off. Well, the kid's going to fall off, ladies and gentlemen. We have a budget that doesn't balance. You are being asked to vote to support a budget that doesn't balance. You are being asked to vote for a budget that stiffs our creditors. I don't think you have the right to be asked to vote to stiff our creditors. The only basis in which you get to stiff your creditors is in a bankruptcy court, which we don't want to be in because it's going to be very ugly. The right answer very clearly is not to stiff our creditors. And in order to do that, we need to restructure the whole kit and caboodle. We actually have to get the right revenue number. We have to subtract from that the deficit. And then we have whatever's left, the services have to fit into that box, which means probably they have to be dramatically restructured.
Let me interject here and let me give you a little history on Winsted. When Henry came into town hall, he was hired because the town manager at the time, Dennis Moore, had taken monies from the water company and the sewer company, which were separate at that time, and used it to balance the town budget. It fell apart. The selectmen that were elected, and it was a Republican board headed by Jimmy O'Mara. Nancy Eisenlohr was on it. Kevin Nelligan's father, Frank Nelligan, was on it. They went to the Winston Savings Bank. They were called to the Winston Savings Bank. And, you know, the statement that was made to them was, if you don't raise revenue, you will go broke. They came back with a plan. It wasn't a plan that was well received, but it was a plan. And the plan was a supplemental tax to close the gap. They put more financial controls in. They brought in Henry. They put in a new financial system. The town at the time was running on a single financial system, and you know, they made the change. Different environment. We were coming out of I would say a mild recession, and there was you know, a building boom started to go on, and revenues picked up and took off. And the town has sailed along since, you know, the late 80s. Can't do that now. I mean, this is a very different environment, very different economy out there, and you don't have people that, you know, want to take the bull by the tail and fix the problem.
Yeah, I mean, those city fathers are probably spinning in their graves or choking on their cocktails. I mean, they had a problem, they recognized it, they fixed it, they developed a plan, they pushed it through, they made it work. We have a problem, a similar sort of problem. We spent a long time denying it. We haven't devised any plan for fixing it, and we have no apparent intention of ever devising a plan for fixing it. People are running around town and saying, we have a plan, we have a plan, we have a plan. It's called the same old budget with the same old problem with the same old growing deficit. But we're going to put $600,000 or $700,000 into the fund balance, they say. Well, $700,000 isn't going to pay $2.5 million of bills or $3.5 million of bills or $4.5 million of bills. $700,000 in the fund balance isn't going to cure our credit problem. $700,000 in the fund balance isn't going to provide us with the flexibility to replace the dam if it breaks. $700,000 in the fund balance isn't fixing the problem. It isn't a plan, ladies and gentlemen. It's a prayer, not a plan. And prayer doesn't work. Prayer is not the way we structure government. Prayer doesn't work.
What you need to look for, and it's not in this budget, and that's why we are voting no, we're asking you to vote no, but you need to consolidate the financials under a single financial director on a single platform. You have to update the platform, you have to update the software, because the software has really been improved over the last 20 years. And you have to make an investment so you know what you're taking in revenue and what you're spending. I mean, you have to do that.
You have to go back to old-fashioned budgetary discipline. Get the revenues right, get the expenses right, make sure the revenues equal or exceed the expenses. In order to do that, we need to restructure our services. We've talked about it over and over and over again. Combining functions, closing a school, eliminating to some degree some of the compensation parts of our cost structure. No one else gets health benefits for their families anymore. You don't get health benefits for your families anymore. That disappeared in virtually everywhere a long time ago. But they still exist in Winsted, and they represent a cost, an example of the sorts of costs that we cannot support anymore. And it's not just the restructuring, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just finding a way to deliver the same expenses less expensively. We actually need to move the town forward. We need to be investing in downtown. We need to be saying to ourselves, gee, we just went through a reval, our grand list declined, our downtown is in a catastrophic situation. We gotta invest downtown. We have to free up the cash to do that. We have to free up the cash to pay for the deficit. We have to free up the cash to do all of these things. Because fundamentally, this budget, which is supposed to be the blueprint for the partnership between our government and our people, is based on lies. It is deception, it is deceit, it is duplicity, it's all those D words, which is, kind of weird because there's a majority of D people on the Board of Selectmen. It's not acceptable. It is not the basis for any sort of collaboration going forward. Let's bring it full circle, back to the smell test. What does this budget do? More of the same. Does it restructure anything? No. Does it recognize the deficit or pay for the deficit? No. Does it make the deficit bigger, i.e. providing the same services in the same inefficient manner without a restructuring? Yes.
Yes.
Does it recognize the fact that we have just driven water and sewer rates up 40% and seek to compensate people for that by lower taxes? No. This budget is predicated upon a 23% increase in taxes. Now, the other side, the supporters of the budget, are going to tell you that they are like throwing things at their TV right now. They are saying, no, 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 there is no 23% increase. It's an equalization. Equalization, smequalization. I mean,
if your property value goes down 20%, you should see a 20% drop in your tax bill.
Your Board of Selectmen, the majority of your Board of Selectmen, made a clear and simple choice. They could have chosen to keep the mill rate at 25.4, and they would have been justified in saying that's a flat budget. And that would have involved some degree of restructuring of our services.
Yes.
They could have done that, but they decided not to. They decided to jack your taxes by 23% to keep spending flat. They said, we need something to be flat. We really hate the idea of keeping taxes flat. We much prefer the idea of keeping spending flat. Let's choose the spending option, because we've always chosen the spending option here in Winsted, and let's call it equalization.
Only in Winsted. Only in Connecticut. I mean, this situation has played out over and over and over. And I'll bring you the results from the Connecticut River Valley next week. But we voted today.
Yeah. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the sort of foregone results of some mathematical formula that had spat out of Selectman Perez's calculator. No, this is a choice. This is a choice to increase taxes by 23% on top of the 40% increases in taxes that are generating supposedly increases in revenue in the water and sewer side that aren't going to fix the deficit, that aren't going to restructure our services, that aren't going to invest in downtown, that aren't going to do a single meaningful, tangible thing for we, the citizens. The Board of Selectmen have made their choice. They have advanced a budget that doesn't work. It doesn't include the expenses. It has bogus revenues. It doesn't budget. It doesn't balance, I beg your pardon. We have grown in our current year the deficit from $1.2 million to somewhere between 2.5 and 4. This budget, because on its face we're being told it changes nothing, will grow it by a similar amount. And we've seen what happens when we saddle the next generation with debts that we cannot pay. And yet that's what we are being asked to do here. We are being asked to break Winsted by adding to this gigantic deficit. And simply refusing to acknowledge that it exists. Or saying, okay, it exists, but we don't actually have to do anything about it. Because we're going to throw that shoebox in the river. And if your name happens to be on one of those bills, tough. Tough, ladies and gentlemen. That's the plan. Tough. Well, here's the answer, ladies and gentlemen. On June 1st, you have the opportunity to choose just as the Board of Selectmen has chosen. And we are suggesting, we are recommending, and we would even go so far as to say we are urging that you take a different choice. That you ask, you demand, you press in no uncertain terms for the opportunity to look and judge an alternative budget. A budget that does address the deficit. A budget that does restructure our costs to make them affordable. A budget that does take some of those savings and reinvest them in our downtown, in our grand list. You have the option to make that choice. There are alternatives. You cannot believe the selectmen when they say we cannot be more efficient. We cannot provide better services. We cannot provide something that makes more sense. That's bullcrap, ladies and gentlemen. We've shown you other towns that have done it. We've given you all of the common sense ideas about how it can be done. It is purely a matter of will.
You know, you have to stop. You have to get control of the situation, which no one has to date. And you're going to have to make some hard choices.
And you have to recognize that no amount of equalization, or whatever you choose to call it, represents a plan that can or will change a 23% tax increase into something that is not a 23% tax increase.
To diverge a minute, there was an interesting program on NPR today, and it was the rates of poverty in cities and in suburbs. Cities are approaching 36-37% in Connecticut. Suburbs are approaching 9 to 10%. But the author of the paper from the Brookings Institute was, she used the word scale at least 50 times, and she said most small towns and most cities are so pigeonholed in what they do and what they offer that you're going to have to regionalize to gain the scale, to use the technologies to deliver the services more efficiently. And this is what has to happen here in Winsted. I mean, you can no longer go it alone. You can't do it with 300 kids in a high school. You're just too small in scale for the cost structures that are out there, and you have to combine. You're really going to have to look at regionalization of a lot of things.
Or you have to simply accept that your costs are going to go up exponentially, and you have to agree to actually pay them. You cannot pass a budget that basically says Winsted is a deadbeat town. You should not simply expect to walk into that ballot, into that voting hall, and say, we get to vote to stiff our creditors. We get to vote to stiff our teachers. We get to vote to stiff our employees. That we are going to expect them to come to work without any certainty that they will ever actually be paid. Yes, the restructuring choices are going to hurt some people. But that's the way town government works, ladies and gentlemen. We have to work for the common good, and the common good is actually turning Winsted back into a sustainable economic entity.
Yes.
Through restructuring of our services, reducing of our costs, and reinvesting in our town, all the while paying off the deficit and ensuring we are not contributing to some future deficit. We need a budget that pays our bills. We need a budget that pays the bills that we have run up in the past, and we need a budget on which we can build upon so that we can have the confidence that we will be able to pay our bills going forward. There is no such thing as equalization that can change a 23% tax increase into a 1% tax increase or a 3% tax increase. Whether the deficit is $2.5 million or $3.5 million or some completely different number, it has to get paid for. These are the fundamentals upon which the budget has to be built.
We'll have an opportunity to do one more program before the
next Tuesday
referendum on Saturday, June 1st. We will put together, we'll look at what the auditors
come up with, and we'll run that by you next Tuesday, and we'll get you out to vote on Saturday. With that, ladies and gentlemen, avoid the tornadoes and the thunderstorms, and think upon some of the messages that we have left you with here tonight. You need a budget that works. You need a budget that you can afford. You need a budget that does the revitalization and the restructuring and the reinvestment that you so desperately need here in Winsted. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Good night.